Hi, Angie.
There we go. Can you hear me okay now?
I can. I just wanted to see if we could hear each other. Perfect.
Good.
Maureen's coming on now. I'll worry about Nashawn if she hasn't come on in the next 2 minutes.
Okay. Trying to make sure this thing stays on my head.
I'm going without earphones today.
Well, I was worried just because I don't have the greatest sound on the laptop, and I thought this might help a little bit.
Makes sense.
It also helps to hide the fact that my hair right here wants to fluff out. So, there's that.
Look at this. Ugh. I've given up.
I understand. I actually ordered scissors and thinning shears. I'm desperate. Oh, there's Nashawn coming.
There's Nashawn. She's coming on. Perfect. Okay. Hey, Maureen came on too. Nashawn, can you test out your audio?
Good morning or afternoon.
Hello, how are you? Perfect.
Good, thank you.
We'll start in 5.
Hey, Nashawn. Hey, it's Jill. Hey, Angie.
Hello.
All right.
Hey, Maureen.
Maureen, I was saying, can I test your audio? And I was on mute.
Well, we're all kind of there, so I get it.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, 3 minutes until we start. Well, good afternoon to some, good morning to others. This is Angelica Vilpando with the Council for Opportunity and Education, and we are glad you can be with us today on preparing for the 2020 Talent Search and EOC competition. We have Maureen Hoyler, who is the president of COE, along with a talent search practitioner, Angie Holley, and Nashawn Mosley, a practitioner of EOC. They are going to help you start preparing for the upcoming competition. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Maureen Hoyler.
Well, good day. So thanks a whole lot for joining us today. I know that you've got tons on your hands with supporting your students and their families, answering questions, dealing with your own families. And so being able to look ahead to these two competitions is really a tribute to your organization and planning. So let's go to the PowerPoint, Jelly. So we're going to go over some of the basics of and what our expectations are in this competition. So again, to the next slide. I had a conversation with the Department of Education this morning, and unfortunately, we're no closer to the FAQs than the last conversation I had with the Department of Education, I don't think. But it does appear that the regular work of the department is proceeding. So they are anticipating that the talent search and EOC competitions will move as scheduled. Having said that, everything is in flux. You know, when you think about where you were in your mind 2 weeks ago, it's probably different than where you are today. And the uncertainty of the next month, the next 2 weeks is driving us all crazy. So it's important to have both of those perspectives as you move forward. The pandemic changes everything and changes it more for our students and our clients than it does for us. There's many more of them. There'll be many more displaced workers that are looking to some way to get out of their situations when their jobs have disappeared. There'll be many more families that are reliant on their high school, secondary school students. There'll be much more doubt about, is higher education a viable option? And so your work in Talent Search and EOC, and for those who are thinking of writing for a new application, is going to be even more valuable than it has been in the past. But having said that, the basic rules remain the same. Writing in trio competitions is an endurance run. It really is not a test of brilliance. It's not a test of intelligence. It's a test of persistence and thought. It's a test of being able to manage a team and solicit the best ideas from everybody. And always there's an element of luck in it. There's easy grading panels and hard grading panels, and particularly for new applications that might have been funded by one panel might not be funded by another panel. So that's not so much the case with continuing programs, because those prior experience points do give you some insurance against the really hard panel. We will be taking questions during this webinar, and so we'll take some questions right after my presentation, and then I think you'll probably have a lot more questions for Nashawn and Angie, who are the educators who put the thought behind how they're going to write this application and how they're going to change or adjust for the current situation. But if you do have a question, please put it in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. If there's one rule about writing applications, it's two-sided. Don't write it by yourself. Don't go off. Of course, you are in a corner right now by yourself or with 17 other people who happen to live in your house, but you're by yourself. And so, but even in this time, you should be engaging your staff. You should be engaging others at your institution in the planning for these applications. From an institutional point of view, they are very concerned about the pipeline to enrollment, whether that's re-enrollment for existing students or enrollment of new students. None of our institutions, from what I can gather from, that's not true. Some of our institutions believe that, like earlier recessions, there will be an uptick in enrollment. I think the consensus feeling, though, is that there may not be an uptick in enrollment. The more likelihood is, even among our community colleges, is that there'll be a loss of enrollment. So as you work with your institution, what you do, even though you don't focus just on your institution, is much more crucial to their health as an institution. Getting people back in school, getting people into college, those things are really crucial to their health right now. And it's important that you, as you work with different offices at your institution, you make that contribution to your institution known. So both in terms of involving others at your institution and also involving your staff. It's wonderful for a person like myself who heads up a staff that has so many ideas that I don't have to have too many ideas. I just have to listen. And I think many of us are in that situation as well. There's a lot of creative people on your staff. If you listen to your students and what they need, this is a time to let your listening form some of the ideas that you'll put on paper later. Next slide, please. So the department has stated that they would like to have both proposals due in the fall. If that's correct, the first application package will probably be due in August. Next slide. We're anticipating that talent search will be due sometime between October 15th and December 15th, and EOC sometime between January 15th and March 15th. So the COE is also anticipating that, as always, we will do at least 3 proposal writing workshops, and we'll read drafts at each of those proposal writing workshops. Our current expectation is that we will have one in May and one later in the summer, and then one after we have better information from the department. And the May or June one, and Jelly probably just died when I said May. I think it's probably more likely to be, well, I don't know what it's going to be, but May or June. And it'll be virtual as opposed to on-site, but it will give you an opportunity to have your drafts read.
That's correct, Maureen. So it will be the end of June for both the talent search forum and a talent search and EOC proposal writing workshop.
Thanks, Jelly. See what I said? You know, if you're leading the team, the team's got it all under control, all you have to do is let them keep it under control. So right now it is too early to determine how much money is going to be available. You know that there's really 2 pots of money that could affect this competition. One would be money that would be available just for 2 years, and one would be something that would go into your base. So we're asking for both. both increase in your base, as well as a temporary bump up so that you can assist in serving more students as colleges reopen in person. If that happens, if we get a temporary bump up, we'll also have to get a temporary change in prior experience, because it's not reasonable to expect you to provide the same continuity to people that you serve just for the crisis. We do know that there will be more programs, there will be more students. Let me take that back. We don't know that, but we have every expectation that there will be new money and increases in the number of both EOC and talent search programs funded. Next slide, please. So again, back to the basics. The questions, all except any competitive preference priority questions, were finalized in the last competition. So you don't have to wait for anything to come out. Everything is, all the questions are out already. Peer review form, you can go to the regulations. You could, I think we probably could send a reader's comment form to everybody that signed up for this webinar. So you can start looking at the questions right now, starting to draft some things. Don't get too busy in the drafting yet, but at least know what the questions are you're going to have to answer. You have to answer every question. Now, we know that data is going to be a real issue, that you're not going to have, their school districts aren't going to, they'll be lucky if they're functioning. They're not going to have as much data. They're not going to have as many people. They're not going to have as many resources as you typically would have. So the point is to answer the questions and to show how bad the situation really is, even if you have to take core data and modify it. Next slide, please. A lot of people get involved and they get so caught up in answering the need questions that they miss the major work of writing a proposal. And that's really, should you change your design, or if you're writing new, what should your design be? What is an appropriate design given this time? For all of us, probably one of the things that will change about what we do is our virtual relationships with our clients and students. So that's going to be a change in most people's designs. That's not to say you should be writing a virtual proposal, a proposal that everything's going to be virtual. But some of the things that you may have not known you could do until you did them in the last couple of weeks, or will do them in the next few weeks, you can add to this design that you're adding. Talk to other programs in your area. See if there's a logic that you can put together in terms of service area so that there's not overlap if you don't need to have overlap. Make sure that you're getting support from your sponsoring agency. Next slide, please. Having said all that about the design, most people who are not funded have lost all the points they need not to be funded in need and objective. So you've got to get those baseline numbers in your needs section. You've got to know what the enrollment in post-secondary education is. You've got to know what retention is. You've got to know those baselines. Those are harder for EOCs than they are for talent search applications. And as I said before, there's really no reality against which to create these numbers, to come up with these numbers, because you can't look at 1920 or 1819 and say that's what's going to be happening in 21, 22. nobody knows what's going to be happening in 21, 22. So there's an uncertainty in these numbers. Probably all we can say is that they're worse. They're going to be worse than they are now, where they were last year. It's important and need to talk about people, not just as statistics, but as people. What are they experiencing? What's happening in Chicago? What's happening in West Virginia? Is it different? Are people, how scared are they? How hopeless are they? How, or what is actually happening? Have families been disrupted in ways that are unusual? Find out, express the human dimension of this, not just the statistical dimension of your need. Next slide, please. Also ask yourself a lot of basic questions. For talent search, where are you going to pick up students? How many are you going to pick up in 6th grade? How many of them are going to stay with you through 12th grade? How many times a year do you expect to see them? How many times a year do you expect to see them virtually? How many times do you expect to see them? How do you expect to keep them engaged? Do you give every student or client the same level of services? Are there some clients that you give more services to than others? Are there ways that you can separate out those clients so that your reader can understand that? How many schools in talent search are you going to serve? If you can limit the number of schools, and that's probably politically very difficult at this time, think about limiting the number of schools. Next question, please. Next slide, please. Think about the bridging process. What does it take to keep a student on track? What does it take to get a student back on track? Why are they considering dropping out? Why are they considering not going to college? What are the differences in the dynamics? How many touch points do you have to have between May and September to keep a student or a client on track? Whether that's into a GED program or whether it's into a college. Next slide, please. So we're at questions. I think we have maybe a few questions, but not a whole lot. So Jelly, why don't you give me the questions and then we'll turn it over to our expert.
Perfect. So the first question is, will there be a change to the format of the application narrative and CPPs for talent search? And you can talk about that for EOC too.
I doubt if there'll be a difference in the number of pages, which is 65 for talent search and 50 for EOCs. These are both guidelines. They're not requirements, but you'd be foolish not to pay attention to them. Double spaced, you can single space tables and charts and footnotes.
So also let me just state that based on the Student Support Services competition and the Training Grants competition, it's likely that you will have until 11:59 Eastern time instead of the 4:30 p.m. Eastern time deadline. That has changed. And again, as Maureen has indicated, that all the formatting is suggested or recommended and not mandated. But the due date and the time stamp is mandatory. If you do miss submitting your application even by 1 minute, if it goes to midnight the next day, AM Eastern time, it will be dismissed.
Also, you can anticipate that both for talent search and EOC, there'll be a logic model required, or even if it's not required, that it is a kind of necessary component of your evaluation section.
Yeah, it'll be under strong theory. Yep. So the next question is, what is the typical registration cost for the proposal writing workshops?
They're free to institutional members.
And let me just follow up with that they COE members are the only individuals that can attend. So if you are you're a non-member, you shouldn't be on this call today because this is only for members as well. But if your institution membership expires, like let's say the end of this month, and we have it in June, then you would have to renew before you could get into the proposal writing workshop. I will say too that there is a registration fee for the talent search forum, and at this time we haven't set the cost yet, but they most likely will not go up from last time. Considering the impact and implications of COVID-19, will present regarding future possible remote learning, is it anticipated that the Federal Register for Talent Search will include language on the use of on-learning in future competitions?
No. They're overwhelmed with, they have $14 billion that they're trying to get to colleges that they can't get out. The idea that they're going to do anything except cut and paste anything for TRIO is probably would be a stretch.
Overall advice for the writing of renewals versus the writing of new programs.
Well, first, if you're writing a new program, I think it's really important that you talk with other programs in your area. I think that's true for continuing programs too, that they do this, and not that it's going to affect your funding or your chances of getting funding, but once you get funded, it affects your chances of being successful. So this is also true for both. People tend to be overly ambitious. I think you have to be conservative in your objectives as opposed to trying to just be very, very high in your objectives, especially at this time. But all in all, I think it's, and the only other thing I would say is that it's even more important for new applications to get institutional and community commitments.
What are your recommendations for nonprofits writing for the first time it says for talent search, but maybe you want to give advice for both?
Same thing. Depending on if you're a talent search, if you're a nonprofit that has a broader reach of YMCA, a Boys and Girls Club, or if you're a college access program that for the first time is writing for federal money, that reach you have in your community, that support you have from your community is really important, and stress it, try to build on it. You have a very good chance of being funded, whether you're writing for the first time for EOC or for talent search. EOC typically has a very high cutoff score, in part because it has a low base of current programs funded. So, and huge need. So if you're writing for an EOC, even though I think this will be the best competition in a while to write for an EOC, you still have to be a perfectionist in writing. You can't lose points in that application.
Okay, someone's asking about the budget. Like it says, what do you use for a baseline for budget?
Okay, I think the last time for new applications it was $220,000. I may be wrong on that.
Oh.
We will find that out and send that out to for current programs. I would start with a budget that was probably 3% higher than you currently have, assuming that you'll get 3% for next year, and then that they'll ask you to freeze the budget after that.
Is it frowned upon to use 18-19 data from the schools, considering all of what's going on now?
it would typically be frowned upon. I think that in this instance, you could use 18-19 data, but then you would have to adjust it with and I'm not saying you have to necessarily adjust the numbers, but you might have to explain the numbers. You might have to say, but based on conversations with principals, we expect blah blah, or conversation, so that you don't just act like you're still in 1920. You act like you know that you're in a different situation than 18-19.
For EOC specifically, do you see a potential increase or decrease in recruitment numbers?
COE is working with the Department of Education, but that's on hold. But maybe we'll get back to it by the summer to assist programs that are funded way below the the average cost per client, to allow them to reduce their numbers. Unless you are funded way below the average cost per client, and by way below, I'm talking at least $50 below, I don't think that there's much of a chance that you reduce your numbers, nor have to increase your numbers beyond the money that you would get. Now, having said that, in the past few years, we've gotten increases in money without increases in the number of clients and students to be served. My expectation is that that's going to be hard to argue for, that if we get a 10% increase in funding, that you'll have to increase your students or clients by 10%. You'll have the chance not to accept the money, but you won't have the chance to get the money without an increase in students or clients.
We have a couple more minutes, so we're going to take a few more questions, and then we're going to turn it over, okay? What are the major facts that can cause a talent search or EOC program to be discontinued or not awarded the grant for the next cycle?
Almost, basically, they write a proposal that falls below the cutoff. There is this issue of substantial progress where you have to meet 85% of your numbers. However, the Department of Education has assured us that if you met 85% of your numbers in 2018-19, you're not going to be asked about substantial progress. So again, it's the quality of the proposal.
Okay, and our last one and would be advice for those writing renewals, whether you can substitute schools in and out, and for those that have been included in your current proposal.
You have to serve at least, in order to qualify for prior experience, you have to serve at least half of the target schools that you currently are funded to serve. So if you can't meet that criteria because some of your schools have closed, for example, not now, not this month, but sometime before these applications are, before the application packet is published, you'll want to work with your program officers to get an accurate listing of your current schools. So if certain schools have closed, you want to make sure that they're not on your current list.
All right, well, thank you. I know that there's many more questions that have come in, and we will have more time at the end of the presentation to answer these plus any others that you would have for our practitioners. So we're going to turn it over to Angie Holley. She has served as the director of the Marshall University Heart of Appalachia Talent Search Program for the past 17 years and is a proud alum of the Student Support Services program. Throughout her professional career, she has written successful grants for Talent Search, EOC, and Student Support Services. Her educational background includes a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in student affairs counseling, as well as a master's degree in humanities. Currently, she serves as the president of the Mid-Eastern Association of Educational Opportunity Program Personnel, or otherwise known as MIA. Thank you, Angie. I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, well, first of all, thank all of you for joining us today. I know that in the midst of all the uncertainty, just having the opportunity to take time to be here is certainly appreciated. Much of what Maureen stated is that, many of us are feeling on behalf of our students, the uncertainty, seeing some of the crisis responses that we're trying to give to students, and that will carry forward as we get ready to write our proposals. Next slide. We don't have the ability to tell fortunes currently. We don't know when we're going to resume normal operations, and we don't have a clear idea of how all of this is going to impact our students long term. The one thing that we do know is that the foundational elements of our grant are not going to change. We know that there will still be need, objectives, plan of operation, applicant and community support, quality of personnel, budget, and evaluation plan. Now, for the sake of time today, I'm going to focus on those first four elements because I think that we will have the opportunity to invest quite a bit of work in that right now because of what we're experiencing. Next slide. So the first section, and what I think is really it's the foundation for the rest grant, is need. Once you establish need, it sets the stage for the entire outlook of your grant in terms of your objectives, your plan of operation, etc. So need is extremely important. Next slide. So what can you be doing now? Even though we are in a time of uncertainty, some of us, myself included, are trying to figure out how to operate our programs remotely, there are some things that we can be doing now to best prepare in regards to need. One is start looking at what data is there and available. Right now, the only stable data that we have in place is from 2018, 2019. For many of us, I know in our state, our schools were not able to administer any of the end of year testing. We all know that ACTs and SATs have been postponed, so we don't necessarily have that baseline data. However, just to piggyback on what Maureen said, this might be the only baseline that we have to provide, but we do need to make the argument throughout that baseline data that all of that has changed in response to COVID. The other thing is reaching out to your schools, districts, and state agency early and follow up with them often. They are very bombarded right now, just as we are. So I would reach out early because it may take you a while to get the data that you need from them. Also, reaching out to them in terms of, what are their needs? One of the things that we plan to do is to send out a survey to our principals as well as to our two superintendents to find out, what is it that they're finding as the greatest needs right now in light of what's going on with the COVID crisis and what they predict maybe some of those needs they may have going forward. Collecting research and news articles on education topics. That is something that can be easily done. There are a lot of things coming out right now in response to what's going on in the world of education and what they think may be going to happen in regards to things like enrollment, what's going to happen in terms of students who are in public schools, how long is it going to take them to recover academically from this. The other thing that you can do is starting to figure out how you want to organize your data so that it can be accessed easily. And finally, one of the things that I find when I write can be the most frustrating is how to get my darn charts and graphs organized and how I want those to look. Technology has changed a lot in 5 years from when we wrote previously. So is there a way to be thinking about how you want that organized visually in terms of that data? Next slide. So the basics, the questions that Maureen referenced are the same. Those are going to include things like, a high percentage of low-income families residing in the target area. Things to look at on that, obviously, before this happened, census could give us that baseline data. But I think another thing to look at here is we're going to need to look at, in light of COVID, things like unemployment rates. We know that they're skyrocketing. As the beginning of April, 6.5 million filings for unemployment were on record. So I think helping them understand that, yeah, this baseline data says that we were already in trouble, as many of our communities are in terms of low-income families. This has now been exacerbated by what's going on, and unemployment data might be able to assist us with making that argument. Low rates of high school persistence among individuals in target schools. Again, while that traditional data from 1819 might set a baseline, you know that because of this, there's going to be reduced rates of people who are persisting. Quite honestly, what I'm finding in West Virginia at this point, while there is an online school model that students are following, because of the limited access to technology, many of those students are simply going to be passed for the sake of passing them because they don't have a way to reach those students. And I think that's an argument that's healthy to make when you're writing that particular, in response to that particular question. Low rates of students in target schools who graduate high school with a regular secondary school diploma in the standard number of years. There's already information out there about how that's going to be impacted. There's actually was an NPR article that came out on April 2nd. It's called 9 out of 10 children are out of school worldwide, what now? And it talked about instances such as Hurricane Katrina, hurricanes, for example, in Puerto Rico, and it references how long it took students to get back on track. It was up to 2 years after students were back in a classroom before they were able to even resume what we considered the pre-normal standard of learning. High school graduations dropped immensely as a result of those things. So while your 1819 data may show that they were already in trouble, there are already pieces of information out there and research that you can use to back up that that's going to look worse. Low rates of enrollment in post-secondary programs of post-secondary education. Chronicle of Higher Education, for example, had an article came out by Eric Hoover on March 25th that already argued that enrollment rates are anticipated to plummet as a result of COVID. And part of that is, I think, due to the fact that students, for right now, they're concerned about entering school in virtual formats. And also, we know our students have to work to support their families, and that may be more prevalent now. A high number and percentage of individuals residing in the target area with education completion levels below baccalaureate levels. Oftentimes, again, that's information that's found through the census. But again, I think there's an argument to be made that that's going to increase. And finally, the extent to which the target secondary schools do not offer their students the courses or academic support to complete a rigorous secondary school program of study. For me, my schools were already struggling to provide many of those supports. Not a lot of availability for tutoring for students, for assistance with advanced placement courses. We know that funding cuts to budgets, state budgets, schools is likely to occur. I read something recently where because they're having to divert money to healthcare and other issues of prevalence in light of COVID, that there are concerns that local schools are going to be cut. One of the things I recommend in that is this is a prime example of a way to reach out to your schools to find out what are their concerns moving forward and how might you assist with that. And that can be something that, you find that need at a very basic level, but it helps you write a stronger plan for addressing those needs and plan of operation. Next slide. Student counselor ratio. Under other indicators of need, that's one of the topics that comes up often is student counselor ratio. Oftentimes we know that those numbers are not aligned well, but our school counselors are now going to be dealing with the impact of COVID with their students, the emotional fallout of it, the adjustment back to school. And so while those numbers are already not ideal in regards to student counselor ratio, we're now going to be looking at a situation for one of those, those who are already overtaxed on a good day, that's going to increase, and henceforth our need to be there as a support system. Low academic and achievement test scores. Again, this might be something where you refer back to 1819 as far as a baseline data set. However, evidence is out there that demonstrates that it's going to take these students a while to even get back into the normal mode of classroom learning. Unaddressed socioeconomic problems of eligible individuals, including foster care youth and homeless children in target schools. I want to talk a little bit specifically about that if we'll go to the next slide. other indicators or unaddressed socioeconomic problems, excuse me, are really where you can paint the picture that is unique to your program. This is where you can talk about those things in your community, in your area, where you find your students have some of the greatest need. Obviously, with the pandemic, we're going to be talking to things about job loss and how that impacts families. That's leading to a great deal, I know, for our students, for food insecurity. There's actually an article that came out on March 30th from the New England Journal of Medicine that talks about how food insecurity impacts learning in and out of the classroom. So there are things out there that we can find that can really drive home the point that our students are being impacted at a higher rate. Are there services lost? Some of the community-based agencies may not have the funding to operate anymore. Is that going to limit some of the things that students will need in regards to assistance? Academic deficiencies. We've asked students to move to this online learning module at a time that we had no other choice, but are they still unable to adapt to that online learning model? What can we be doing to help them with online learning? Also, mental and social well-being. I'm seeing it with my students, quite frankly, I've seen it with myself and my staff. There are reduced anxiety levels and stress management, and the fallout from that's anticipated to impact these students for quite some time. And so what is it as a program that we can be doing to assist with that? There's lots of data out there on that right now. The one thing that we've all addressed probably across the board is our students' limitations to technology. Many of the students in our state, we're in West Virginia, we do not have a good broadband system in our state. Even if you have internet, it's not reliable internet. And so are there ways that we can be assisting with it? There's lots of data. You can actually go in and find out individual data for the broadband access within your states. Hardware, some of our students don't have access to computers. I have one county where upperclassmen were given computers to take home through the school system, but middle school students have access to nothing. And is there software that they're being asked to utilize that they don't have available? And is there a way that we can address that? The other part that's always brought up, we've talked about a lot in the past in our grant, is cost of attendance. And I think we're going to see a huge change with this. Students were already struggling to afford college. And in terms of what's going to happen on the college level, there are lots and lots of theories out there right now that the face of higher education is changing probably forever after the impact of COVID. And so part of that is their need to be able to sustain themselves financially. Is that something that will get passed on to students? Our students who are already struggling, is there information out there that indicates that struggle could be increased? FAFSA completions. That is data that probably we will be able to have pretty solid command of. I know in our state, we track it very, very closely as a state. And so what I'm hearing already is that there's been a drastic reduction in the number of FAFSAs that were completed. And so again, that could be a good data piece to include. Debt. In the past, we've talked about debt in terms of student loans, but I'm thinking of it in a different vein right now because I'm seeing many of my middle class families who are struggling now that they have lost their jobs. They're unable to make those mortgage payments. They're unable to make some of those other things, even with stimulus money. And so they're struggling now because, like many middle income families, they're struggling to manage that debt ratio. And so that can be a concern for families in terms of how do they manage their finances after something like this. Next slide. Are there cultural and geographic barriers for your students? I mentioned I live in rural West Virginia where broadband's an issue. We already had a limited college-going culture. How do I anticipate that that's going to be impacted in regards to COVID? And so talking about that limited culture, but I'll also be emphasizing that that's going to increase anxiety for our students because they also are being asked to take on, and I think this is probably for many of you, additional family responsibilities. Many of them right now are serving as the primary caregivers to siblings because their parents are still in fields that are considered essential fields, such as grocery store workers, things of that nature. And so how is that impacting students in terms of their ability to be able to focus on school? Drug epidemics. Unfortunately, none of that has slowed down in the state of West Virginia. I'm sure that's for many of you. as if anything, it's being seen as a higher problem because people don't know how to cope with what's going on, and so that becomes something of an issue. Grandparents, and I should also include family members, raising children and grandchildren, and trying to figure out how to navigate that before this was difficult. How are they adapting to that now? And so there's a lot of good research information out there on all of those topics. Foster and homeless youth. I think in particular for TRIO programs, this is something that we want to reference because we've oftentimes been challenged as a TRIO community. Sometimes people have even asked to be a part of the funding vein of TRIO to get money specifically for foster and homeless youth. For one, it's just a humanity issue. We know that our students who are couch surfing, who don't have consistent home environments, had a lot of struggles before this started. They didn't have adequate elementary and secondary education prior to COVID. What's that going to look like now? Lack of social connections. Students who are moved from home to home were already struggling with that. What's happening? Because none of us right now, quite frankly, have a lot of social connections. So how's that impacting a population that was already struggling? Lower levels of persistence. They were already struggling. So how are they going to do that now? And then finally, availability of homeless shelters. You know, our homeless shelters here in our area are struggling financially. And so is that going to impact students? Next slide. So with objectives, again, these objectives will establish the baseline that your program will use for the measurement for the next 5 years. That's why it's so important in regards to need, that you are making sure that you are addressing and making sure that you are setting objectives that you truly can measure. Next slide. So look at your current objectives, and if you're a current program, and see what was the health of those objectives going into it. For example, myself, I noticed that for our state, enrollment numbers were already dropping, and so that was starting to impact. We were making our objective, but I like to kind of have a good leadway in that. We were noticing that that gap was closing. Again, with objectives, how do you want to present those? Also, again, just looking at that 18-19 baseline along with it's going to COVID to make sure that you're setting reasonable and attainable objectives. Next slide. Plan of operation. This section outlines how you'll run your program. Next slide. Make sure, if I could give you any piece of advice, you stated that you had need, you set objectives of percentages based on that need. You have to, because you've mentioned that in those two places, you have to address how you and your program are addressing that in your plan of operation. Everyone's service model should look different right now than it is in the past. You know, we've now been forced to use technology, so we should make sure that we're making technology more prevalent throughout our service plan. That doesn't mean that you change your face-to-face meetings, as Maureen said, those are critical, but how are you going to implement that? Survey schools, as I mentioned. Establish if you need, are you going to need additional personnel in order to meet these, this plan of operation? And again, be thinking about how you want your charts and graphs to look. Next slide. So we know that all of these are essentially staying the same. There's one that I want to improvise, and that's the plan for providing services. Make sure that they're unique to your students and schools. Next slide, Jelly. They need to be unique to your student schools. Make it personal. Connect your services with your needs section as our reference. Be creative, think outside the box. None of us have faced what we're facing, so how are you using technology perhaps to enhance that? Be specific about how you're going to provide your services and think ahead on how you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of those services. Next slide. As Maureen mentioned, you need to make sure that you're securing partnerships for your program through applicant community support. Next slide. The things that they're going to be asked is that we talk about what facilities, equipment, supplies, personnel, and other resources are committed by the applicant and resources through written commitments from your schools. Next slide. Make sure your institution knows that you're a college access expert and be persistent in communication with them. Also, make sure that you're reaching out to departments on your campus, whether that's STEM-related offices, career services, whatever that may be making those contacts now. Next slide. Your target schools, talk to them about things like what space you need, the time that you have with students, your Wi-Fi accessibility when you're in school, transportation, co-sponsoring events, and access to school database. Get it in writing. No matter what you do with your institution or with your schools, get it in writing, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't hold water 4 years down the way. Additional methods of community support, next slide, talks about, you know, look at other colleges and universities. If there's a community college in your area, can you partner with them? Looking at your alumni. If you're an existing program, your alumni can be some of your greatest resources. Again, there's several opportunities there for that, but get them all in writing. And last but not least, next slide. As Maureen said, you don't do it alone. You have a lot of wisdom from other members in the TRIO community. COE offers some fantastic workshops. As she mentioned, I've been doing this 17 years, and they certainly are the resource that I go to. Break it into smaller pieces and look for ways to manage your own stress throughout the process. And remember, if you're utilizing all of those things, you've got this. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. Now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Nashawn Mosley. She is known and respected for her down-to-earth personality and down-to-business approach. A passionate leader, she is best known for her roles as a champion of educational opportunities for youth and adults, a speaker, a mentor, an advocate, and an author. A native of Chicago South Side, she's educated in the Chicago public school system and is a first in her family to receive a college degree, including a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in intercity studies, and a doctorate degree in educational leadership. She is the author of Truthfully Speaking, an inspirational memoir of discovery, acceptance, and growth, as well as a co-author of It Takes Money, Honey, Guaranteed Strategies to Wealth Creation, Proven Tips for Financial Freedom, and Developing Faith and Sis Stand on My Shoulders. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Mosley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jelly, and thank you all for the opportunity. So I, very similarly, many of us know that EOC programs have very similar requirements as talent search programs, right? We just serve, for the most part, a different population. So I want us to think of this current crisis, this current pandemic, as an opportune time. This is an opportune time for us to move forward and take advantage of this crisis in a way that best benefits our programs, best benefits our students, and best benefits our communities that we serve. Next slide. All right. So there are several components, and I apologize, there are some things that are missing on here. There are several components that go into the EOC proposal. You obviously have your needs section. You have your needs section, you have your objective section, you have your plan of operations section, you have your applicant and community support, quality of personnel, budget, evaluation, and the quality of the project design, which is not necessarily a section per se, but it is something that you are awarded points for based upon the overall design of your project. Each of those equates points. Overall, for the EOC grant in the last competition, we were at 105 points max, and that's not including the points that we received for the competitive preference priorities. So next slide.
Nashawn, I'll also
Yes.
send out your original proposal, so it will have everything on it. I apologize.
That's okay, thank you. I may have to reference my computer so I can see my presentation. So next slide. So what can you do now? Next slide. I would encourage us to start thinking about our proposal as it relates to those points. Those particular points in general, 67% of those 105 points equals 70 points. That has three main sections: your needs section, which is 24 points, your plan of operations, which is 30 points, and your applicant and community support, which is 16 points. Those sections alone amount to 67% of your actual full proposal. 67% of your proposal. So that is a huge chunk of your proposal. And those are some things that you can begin focusing on now. It's never too early to start working on your proposal. I would also encourage you to start from scratch. Don't feel like this is something that you can copy and paste. So even though we've indicated that there's not going to be a lot that changes, there has been a lot that changed. So while the content of the proposal and the content of the expectations of the proposal may not have changed a lot, there has been a lot of changes that have occurred over the last 5 years. And this is an opportune time for us to figure out what those changes are, figure out what those needs are, figure out how can we relate those needs to the objectives of the project. Then how can we take those needs and those objectives and relate them to how we're going to address, how we're going to redesign our project. So next slide. Let's start paying attention. So how is the COVID-19 pandemic affecting your participants in your targeted communities? How is it affecting your institution or your agency? And how is it affecting our stakeholders? Very specifically speaking, what are some changes that our participants are going through now? We've already talked a lot about, changes in income, low income status. Those low income numbers may increase very potentially as a result of this COVID-19 virus. People losing work, becoming unemployed and underemployed. Our target communities are changing. Stores are closing down. Small businesses are closing. There's very little businesses that are open in our communities right now. And as a result, jobs are having to lay people off. And so there's a lot that's changing within our community and a lot that's changing for our participants. Many of our participants are home right now, and they don't necessarily, although we're trying our best to implement our programs from a virtual standpoint, they don't necessarily have the means to be able to do that. And by means, it doesn't mean that you just give a student a laptop, say, hey, pick up a laptop and a lunch, and then you can have access to virtual learning tools. No, if I'm at home with 4 or 5 siblings, we're all fighting for the Wi-Fi, right? We're all fighting for a quiet corner in a room where we can access our class and have conversations with our teachers and counselors and, individuals that are trying to assist us with getting to that next level, which is ideally post-secondary education. Our institutions and agencies, same thing. Many of our institutions, many of us are working from home. Many of our agencies have had to temporarily close down and work from home. And so how has this affected the way you operate your program? Our stakeholders, what's changed for our stakeholders? Will the same people we were able to rely on for partnering to, get our objectives met for our grant, will those same people and businesses be in place? Will those same community agencies be in place to assist us? So what does that look like as a change for our programs? Next slide. This is an opportunity to do 3 things: reassess your program, redesign your program, and then reposition your program within your institution and within your community. Next slide. So by reassessing, again, we can take reassessing as it relates to our needs section. Again, 24 points of our proposal is our needs section. Reassessing what has changed or has the potential to change as a result of the COVID-19 virus. What do unemployment numbers look like? What about underemployment? Many times we focus so much on people that just lose jobs, but what about those people that aren't making enough? What about those people that have jobs, but they still can't afford to keep the lights on, or still can't afford to make all the provisions that are needed for their household? How many of our students are living in households that have unemployment, that have been impacted by unemployment and underemployment? What are our dropout, stopout rates for EOC, right? We're all about going back, getting those individuals that at one point started the journey and then stopped out. What do those numbers look like? How many of our students that were sent home, even from other TRIO programs, any of our, Upward Bound alum or any of our SSS students that were sent home from their college campus this spring, how many of them are going to go back? How many of them felt supported during this process that it may have turned them on or off from a school? How many of them had the resources to go home or had to determine, can I even afford to pay registration for next semester? Can I afford to fly back? What has been the impact on our students, and how many of them can we go out there? Essentially, EOC program can be considered like a rescue program. We go out there and rescue individuals that at one point were in the educational pipeline, or maybe they've never started the educational pipeline, but they need to make some adjustments to their personal lives to be able to put themselves in a position to have better earning potential. We go out and rescue those individuals. Who can we rescue in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of this crisis? Who's out there for us? So again, looking at this from an opportunistic standpoint, anticipating the 2020 census data, will that information be out in time? We don't know, but as of now, based upon, there's a lot, if I've understood nothing, there's been a lot of reporting, a lot of information gathering, a lot of information that's coming out there. Pay attention to that information, see how we can collect that data, collect that information, and apply it to our program and the services that we provide, and see which of those populations that we can go out there and again, address and rescue. The homeless population. We've heard over the last 2 policy seminars that homelessness has the potential to creep its way into, who we serve, into our eligible population. Not that that's going to necessarily happen, but in light of this current pandemic, that does have the potential. So why not get ahead of it? Why not find ways to at least discuss the homeless population and how they've been impacted by this current crisis? Not even just the current crisis, but what are your homeless numbers over the last 5 years? What's changed from 2016 that has potential to change through 2021? Next slide. The next area that I think is very, very important for EOC programs to pay attention to is the plan of operation. This is the largest number of points that are awarded in a competition. You receive 30 points for your plan of operation. This is an area that you can consider to redesign completely. Again, I think this is an opportunity to start from scratch, not necessarily use it as a cut and paste model. You redesign your existing program. Many of us are recreating that now, right? We're figuring out, how do I, get my participants to access my application online? How do I have a virtual counseling session with a participant? In our program in particular for EOC programs, many of our participants, because we deal with such a wide range in age, from 19 or the potential to be younger than that, all the way up through adults that are in the veterans age. How do we help those participants? Many of them don't have the access or the experience with technology. Many of our participants, we struggle with getting them to be able to access their emails on their phones. So sometimes it's those basic skill sets that we have to address in order for them to be able to access simple things like emails, the FAFSA email that came through, the FAFSA confirmation that came through on their phone. So what are we doing now to try to engage those populations that are struggling with technology, that don't understand what a Zoom meeting is, that never had to participate in a Zoom meeting? How are we working with those participants now? How are we building that into our new program design for the next grant competition? How does this impact your plan to inform your participants, right? So right now, everybody's closed. The schools are closed, community agencies are closed. How are you informing community members? How are you informing stakeholders? How are you informing schools and principals and community agencies and churches about your services? What looks different for you? So while you may used to be, maybe used to going out into the field and making visits, and that's different now. Everything is behind the email. Everything is behind the computer screen. Everything is behind the Zoom meeting. So that looks very different for us now. So start thinking about how that impacts your program going forward. Also, your plan to identify and select looks very different. And how you're gonna serve your participants are different, right? So again, virtual counseling sessions. And how do you engage your participants with being able to access that information? What are you building into your budget for even being able to make sure that your plan of operation is logical and it flows? And think about your new needs section, right? Don't think about the former needs, the needs that you were previously addressing. Think of your plan of operation in light of what are the new needs in the community? What are the new needs of the potential program participants? Next section, next slide, I'm sorry. Applicant and community support. This one is also hefty. It's 16 points of your total overall points for your proposal. This is a perfect opportunity to reposition your program within your institution or your agency structure. Start now with getting those institutional commitments, as Angie mentioned for us already. Start now getting those commitments. Everybody is behind a computer right now, right? It's not like you're going to find people that are either not in their offices or not responsive to emails, because everyone is operating from their computers at this point, or their phones. Who's new in your institutions? Find out who's new. Pay attention to emails that come out from your university if they're announcing new faculty member or new administrators. For an example, we just gotten a new admissions director here at Chicago State University, and we're already on top of reaching out to that individual, making sure that they understand who we are and the value that we bring to the university. EOC programs and talent search alike are unique because we don't recruit for our institution per se, right? So we're not a part of the enrollment management team, but we do have a lot of potential that can drive participants to the university. How can we partner in a way that is mutually beneficial? Can we provide fee waivers? Can we provide, applicants, can we walk applicants through that may be struggling with completing those final touches with completing their application to your institution? Figure out how you can be an asset to your institution, and everybody on your campus should know who you are. Not because you want to be seen, but they should know who you are in terms of your program. They should know your program exists and how your program can serve as a benefit to that institution's mission. How does your mission, this is a time to reassess your mission even, how does your mission, your program's mission, align with your institutional's mission? And make sure that those two things are mutually beneficial. Again, be valuable, make new friends. Within your institutional structure, within your agency structure, is there for nonprofit organizations, do you have a new board of directors? Do you know who your board of directors are? And have you introduced yourself? Are they aware of the value that your program brings to the community that you are situated in? Who are new community partners? What community partners are no longer in existence? Not even just as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, but just over 5 years, a lot can change. Next slide. What else can you do? Next slide. So there are a few things. One, again, start from scratch. A lot has changed in just 1 year from December of 2019 to April of 2020. So imagine what has changed over 5 years with, not even including the COVID-19 pandemic. Figure out what has changed, start from scratch, and be willing to address those needs that have changed. Read the 2016 notice inviting applicants as well as the RFP. Familiarize yourself with every single component. That RFP is thick. It's like 100 and something pages, but it is worth the read because you don't want to be caught off guard with any fine print, any fine details that could prevent you from either earning points or could cost you, with losing points. You don't want to miss out on sections. I remember the last grant cycle, I was kind of confused about that quality of design. I actually thought it was a section we had to write for. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. There's a lot of support. COE is amazing at, if they don't have the answer right then, they will get back to you with an answer. So don't be afraid to reach out. Angelica was the person that answered that question for me in 2016. So if there's something that you don't understand, if you're writing for the first time, don't assume that everything, every TRIO grant operates the same. Read the RFP completely from front to back. Read the notice inviting applicants from front to back. And again, address any questions and concerns that you have. Notify your institution. This is the perfect opportunity to start having those conversations with your institution that you plan to write. Depending on where you're situated or within your university's hierarchy, who do you know? Are you aware of who the grants office is? Are you aware of what the university's procedures are for those that are interested in submitting grants and proposals? Are you the person that hits submit? Are you the person that actually writes? Does your institution have a grant writer? So whether or not you're familiar with those things are crucial. And making sure that you are aware of the university's processes is crucial as well. Start having those conversations and trying to find out what role you play within that. Also start determining roles at your institution. This is a time where you start figuring out, okay, who's doing the research and who's actually writing, who's registering for, grants.gov, who's registering for the proposal writing workshops, who's actually hitting submit. Again, finding out what's your role in this grant writing process. At my institution, it's all on me. Someone else's institution, they may have a grant writer that's responsible for that, and you're just feeding them the information that goes into the proposal and giving it, the final approval. So making sure that you're aware of the process within your institutional structure or your nonprofit structure. Review the 2016 evaluation plan. What were your anticipated outcomes, and then what were your actual outcomes, right? So technically we should have been rewriting our evaluation plan over the last 5 years. So what's changed by way of our evaluation plan? What was anticipated? What do we expect? What are the impacts that we expected to have? And then what were the actual outcomes that came as a result of that? And then use that to inform your new evaluation plan. Year-end electronic surveys are key. Again, everybody's behind a computer now, so the likelihood that people would respond may actually be increased at this point. So this is a great opportunity to send out year-end surveys for partners, for participants. Don't be afraid to ask them, how are they hurting? What are some barriers for them for going back to school? What are some things that have changed for them over the last 12 months? What do they anticipate changing for them over the next 12 months? And include that information in your survey and send it out. Lastly, remember, it is okay to look bad, especially in the needs section. This is the time where it is okay to look bad. It's okay to have communities that reflect disadvantaged situations, because that's what you want to focus on. That's, again, we're the supermen and women, right? We go in to save the day. So if you're focused on communities that are not necessarily in the best shape, it's our job to partake our services and go in and try to rescue them and try to get them on a better path, so that then you can focus on another community down the road. So don't focus on highlighting your program, what you've done well over the last 5 years. You're not writing this proposal in a way that highlights what you've done. You're writing this proposal that that substantiates why it's important that you're there, why you exist, why the need is there, and how you help the need. Next slide. Lastly, there's my contact information if anyone is interested in receiving more information, having further discussions, and just connecting on an EOC level. Again, thank you, Maureen and Angelica, for the opportunity to present, and hopefully able to answer more questions that any of you may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Nashawn, and Angie too. As I said in the beginning, you will be receiving this recording, the slide deck, and the review form that Maureen talked about before. If you would like a copy of the 2015 RFP, email me, angelica.vilpando@coenet.org. We are now going to turn it over to some more questions for the last 5 to 10 minutes. Please, Angie or Nashawn, you guys can jump in too as well. I think your guidance on this too is just as well as what Maureen or I can do from COE. So,
Shelley, let me stop for a second. Why don't we have people who want the application to write to Maya rather than you? I think your email is a little bit full, so we will. If you want the link, why don't we just send everybody the link to the application materials rather than filling up your email box?
all right, we'll put that to Google Drive, and then we will send it out with the materials too.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to ask a number of different questions here. One says, you mentioned a logic model. Can you explain more on this area?
Well, that's something that we'll really go into in the proposal writing workshop. So don't worry about your logic model yet. It would take a little bit of time to just say how to do a logic model, but we will give you a play-by-play on that during the proposal writing workshop.
And I'm just going to say too, for the competitive preference priorities too, we will do webinars on the competitive preference priorities whenever that we know of which ones that they will do if they're doing competitive preference priorities. So it's too early at this time to talk about them and help you, but we will down the road as we learn more. Is there a minimum and maximum number of participants to be served in talent search? And if it is, what is the minimum, what is the maximum?
Yes, there's no maximum. There is a minimum, and I should know it off the top of my head, and I don't.
It's 500, correct, Angie?
I think that is correct.
Yeah.
And in EOCs, it's
1,000.
1,000, yeah.
Could talent search institution have?
Can I stop for a second, though?
Yes, you may.
There's two options for, there are two options if you're in a situation where you think those numbers are too high. You can partner with another institution or another agency and submit as a consortium. Or you can request a reduced amount of money that is reduced proportionally to the number of clients. So I would think, for example, that it may be that 2 of the tribal colleges or 3 of the tribal colleges might want to establish a consortium that would meet these needs. And for those of you in rural areas, that idea might be worth exploring at this time.
Several people are asking if can you write for less students or clients if you ask for less money?
yes, it proportionately. So if you ask for half as much money, you can serve half as many clients.
And tell me if I'm wrong, Angie or Nashawn, but I think that they said last time in the SSS competition that you would have to go back to it's not, if you're a current proposal, you would take half of a new proposal. You would do
That
the
I'm not
cost
sure.
per participant of a new proposal and not the current proposal.
Yes.
Exactly,
I
yeah.
believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. Interesting question, Maureen. Do you think there will be a comment period?
No.
And when we say think, we mean it's our best guess that there will not be.
Right. We don't really think. We guess. We're guessing. Comment.
But I mean, they didn't have a comment period for student support services, which is their largest TRIO program in the last competition. Let's see. Would it be frowned upon to lower your percentages for your EOC objectives?
No one will see your objectives. They won't see your current objectives. So lowering them, nobody knows that you've lowered them.
And just to clarify, we should or we shouldn't use 18-19 data as our baseline.
I'm going to go back with what Maureen said earlier. Probably the only data set that we're going to really have available for the most part is that 18 data set. But I don't think that those numbers establish your baseline. You have to make an argument with other evidence to demonstrate why you would make those numbers lower. Maureen may disagree with me on that, but that would be my perspective.
I would agree with you, Angie. I don't think you're going to have, let's assume you're trying to write this in July. I don't think you're going to have 1920 numbers. Your 1920 numbers aren't going to be reflective of 21, 22, but neither are 18, 19. So it seems like 18, 19 adjusted is what you're thinking about.
And I think too, it's important to something else that Maureen mentioned. If you do use that 18, 19 data to just qualify it based upon conversations we've had, based upon, school district leaders, based upon, so everything is based upon, that's the best evidence base that you have at this point, but definitely qualify the use of that 18, 19 data.
And I was going to say one more thing as a reference, there's already, just in the short amount of time that we've been isolated, tons of research that is coming out to help you make that argument that 18, 19 this is what we have, but we knew it's going to be worse.
My state only tracks FAFSA completion rates by school district. Any thoughts on where to find similar data for adults? Nashawn, we're going to throw that to you.
Yeah, I definitely, there's a few things that you can look at. You can look at, your state's Illinois, your state's higher education data rates. There's also the Department of Education that has data that's also out there. So it's a lot that's out there. The What Works Clearinghouse is out there. So there's a lot that you can look into. Also, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's a lot of data that's out there because you're not just looking at the employment rates, but you're also looking at the reasons for employment rates, which would include educational attainment rates as well.
Nashawn and Angie, you might know this too. So I think, and I do think the need questions in EOCs are complex and because in talent search you can say X% of we've got 2,000 seniors in our target schools. X% of them go to college without the intervention of talent search. But in an EOC target area, there may be X number of adults without a college degree, but only of that group, only a certain percentage have any intention or need or to go to college. So your base that you're looking at is, and so this person is saying, well, if I looked at FAFSA completion, that would give us one way. And I think that's a really good question. How you find out how many individuals from a particular area over a certain age are applying for financial aid or applying for college. I don't have the answer now, but we will work on that with you. Nashawn, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would suggest maybe looking at your local community college rates or your local institution rates. So even though you're not focused on those schools, you can take that data and average it out and create like a baseline data for yourself of how many individuals within this age group are completing FAFSA. You don't care whether or not they went to school for this particular question. You want to know how many of them are completing the FAFSA. So that's a good place that you can get it from as well.
I agree with Nashawn on that. That's exactly the path that I would take.
Okay. Considering the impact of COVID-19, would you focus on social emotional learning components to be included?
Yeah. You can't do that really in EOC in the sense that an EOC doesn't get enough money to have many contacts. Oftentimes they only have one contact with an individual. But certainly as you think about how you're going to serve your middle school students, how you're going to, in talent search, those are things that are really important. When you get up to juniors and seniors in high school, even those social emotional are really important. You can't neglect the hard and fast, choosing a college, applying for admission, working with the parents to make sure that the parents are supportive and knowledgeable. So you can't always just do more. So with the younger students, and Angie, you're much better qualified to answer this question than I think you can re-emphasize and move to more social emotional. In the juniors and seniors and out of school students, you really have to probably do more. You have to do the same amount of college counseling plus more social emotional. Angie, why don't you feel free to disagree on that too.
No, I agree. And I think it's something that in light of what's going on, particularly as I mentioned, if you mention mental health, anxiety, stress, those kinds of things in your needs section, you need to address how you're going to do that in your plan of operation. And so, yes, that social emotional well-being component, you can't, when you're looking at trying to get a student to transfer into a college environment, when you're looking at, some of my students don't always go into college, they go into the workforce. Those social emotional keys are going to be extremely important as they make those transitions.
I think one of the things about need that it's important to emphasize too is in your needs section, you want to be focused on needs that you address in your plan of operation. In EOCs, unemployment rates are really important. In talent search, unemployment rate might be important to show the increase in eligible population, but it's not anything you're going to do anything about. You can't reduce the unemployment rate. And so you want to focus in your needs section on things that your plan of operation is designed to address.
Anything else that you guys would like to share with the community before we get off this webinar?
I'd only like to say that please, we will try to support you. Please let us know what kinds of support are most beneficial. And thanks to our presenters today. I think you were both excellent. Thanks a whole lot.
As mentioned before, both Dr. Mosley and Ms. Holley have their information in the slide decks that we will be sending out to you. Again, we will send out the slide deck, we will send out the recording, we will send out the review form that Maureen mentioned before. It will be a general review form from last time, taking out the CPPs. We will update it once we have more information, but it gives you a good start because most of the questions in a proposal are regulatory. So you could start now, and then we will also send out the request for proposal from the last competition. This concludes our webinar for today. If you haven't gotten your questions answered, please email angelica.vilpando@coenet.org or any of our practitioners that were on the phone today. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye.